السلام عليكم. نلتقي مجددا أعزائي الطلبة في هذه المحاضرة الجديدة من محاضرات مادة النحو المقارن. In this lecture we are going to study subordination, and this will be part 1 of subordination, in which we will discuss subordination in English. First of all, we need to give some definition of this term subordination, though already we have discussed subordination when we discussed the difference between the compound and the complex sentences, but since we are going to study subordination in detail in this lecture, we need to give some definition so as to make it clear to you what do we mean by this term. So subordination is the use of a subordinating conjunction to make the meaning of one clause dependent on another clause. إذن subordination هي عملية استخدام إحدى أدوات الربط التي تسمى subordinators or subordinating conjunctions، والغرض هو أن نجعل معنى إحدى العبارات الفعلية يعتمد على العبارة الفعلية الأخرى. So, a complex sentence is a sentence formed by an independent clause and a dependent clause that begins with a subordinating conjunction. إذن حين نستخدم إحدى أدوات الربط التي تسمى subordinators or subordinating conjunctions، في هذه الحالة سيتكون لدينا نوع جديد من أنواع الجمل، والتي أطلقنا عليها اسم الجملة المعقدة complex sentence. في هذا النوع من الجمل يتكون لدينا عادة نوعان من أنواع العبارات الفعلية. We have two clauses. One of the clauses will be the dependent clause، العبارة الفعلية التابعة أو غير المستقلة، والتي يكون في بدايتها أداة الربط subordinator. أما العبارة الفعلية الأخرى فستبقى هي عبارة فعلية مستقلة or independent clause. Now, what do you mean by a subordinate clause? ماذا نعني بالعبارة الفعلية التابعة؟ Subordinate clauses, as the name implies, are not independent sentences and they cannot stand alone. إذا حين نقول subordinate clauses أو عبارات فعلية تابعة، معناها كما يشير الاسم إنها ليست جمل مستقلة ولا يمكن أن نستخدمها كجمل بحد ذاتها. That means that they cannot have meaning on their own، والسبب إنه لا تمتلك معنى مكتمل، لذلك لا يمكن أن نستخدمها كجملة مستقلة وقائمة بحد ذاتها. They are dependent on and have to be attached to a main clause. دائما تكون هذه الclauses اللي نسميها subordinate clauses or dependent clauses دائما تكون تابعة إلى العبارة الفعلية الرئيسية، ويكون معناها مرتبط بمعنى العبارة الرئيسية، ولذلك لا يمكن أن نستخدمها كعبارة أو كجملة مستقلة. This is what we mean by a subordinate or dependent clause. Now, you can see here what do we have in dependent or subordinate clauses. Of course, since we have a clause, then we have a subject and a verb. ما دام عندي clause، إذن لابد من وجود الفاعل والفعل. Doesn't express a complete thought. إحنا قلنا إنه العبارة الفعلية التابعة أو غير المستقلة لا تعبر عن فكرة أو معنى متكامل. Cannot stand on its own. It's not a sentence. أيضا لا يمكن أن نستخدمها كجملة مستقلة وقائمة بحد ذاتها. Begins with a subordinating conjunction. دائما العبارة الفعلية التابعة تبدأ باستخدام إحدى أدوات الربط التي نسميها subordinating conjunctions. Also, regarding subordinate clauses, they are used to add more information to sentences. احنا قلنا إنه subordinate clauses or dependent clauses تكون هي عادة عبارات فعلية تابعة وثانوية، ليست مهمة جدا كما هو الحال في العبارات المستقلة. لكن ما هو الغرض من وجود subordinate clauses؟ الغرض منها هو إعطاء إضافات أو معلومات إضافية لمعنى الجملة. إذن هو معنى إضافي وليس معنى أساسي في الجملة. As you can see in the example, although I was scared, I crept inside. The main idea here or the main information is I crept inside. هي هاي المعلومة الرئيسية الموجودة بالعبارة الفعلية المستقلة. أما العبارة الفعلية التابعة although I was scared, this is not the main clause. هذه ليست هي العبارة الرئيسية، ليست الفكرة الرئيسية، لكنها فكرة ثانوية الغرض منها فقط إعطاء المزيد من المعلومات. إذن دائما يكون subordinate clause وظيفته هو لغرض إضافة معلومات أخرى لكنها ليست المعلومات الرئيسية في الجملة. As you can see here in this example, or these three examples in fact, how we analyze a sentence into its basic elements of being or having a main clause, the conjunction, and the subordinate clause. In example number 1, Vinrin asks me if I can go to have lunch with him. Here we have used the subordinator if. Then we have a complex sentence. So, if I can go to have lunch with him, this is the subordinate or the dependent clause, while Vinrin asks me, this will be the main or the independent clause. In example number 2, father tells us that he has so much work to do. Here we have used that as a conjunction to connect between these two clauses. So, that he has so much work to do, this will be the subordinate or the dependent clause, while the first clause, father tells us, this will be the main or the independent clause. In example number 3, Granny wants to know where we went on our holiday. Here we have used where as a conjunction or as a subordinating conjunction in fact to connect between these two clauses. So, Granny wants to know, this will be the main or the independent clause, while the other clause, which begins with the subordinator where we went on our holiday, this will be the subordinate or the dependent clause. Now we need to know, what do we mean by subordinating conjunctions or subordinators? What does this term mean? So, what is subordinate conjunctions? A subordinating conjunction is a word which joins together a dependent clause and an independent clause. إذن subordinators or subordinating conjunctions هي عبارة عن كلمات تستخدم للربط ما بين نوعين من أنواع العبارات الفعلية. النوع الأول رح يكون عبارة فعلية مستقلة، والنوع الثاني سيكون عبارة فعلية غير مستقلة، وهي التي تبدأ باستخدام إحدى subordinators. As you can see in the sentence here, I read the paper because it interests me. Now, here you have two clauses. I read the paper because it interests me, which have been joined by using the subordinator because. So, the dependent clause here is because it interests me. And the independent clause is I read the paper. And the conjunction is the word because. Also, in the example here, helicopters can fly when they have fuel. Again, here we have a complex sentence in which we have used the subordinator when to join between these two clauses. So, the first clause, helicopters can fly, will be the major or the main or the independent clause, while the other clause, when they have fuel, this will be treated as the subordinate clause or the dependent clause. Now, attaching a subordinate clause to a main clause. When you place a subordinate clause in front of a main clause, we use a comma like this. While robins are fighting in the garden, other birds eat the food. So, when you use the subordinator in the beginning of the sentence, you start a sentence by using a subordinator. In this fact, you need to put a comma to separate between the two clauses, to separate the dependent clause from the independent clause. So while robins are fighting in the garden, you find here that we put a comma. Then we continue by putting the independent clause. So here the structure is you have a subordinate clause plus a comma plus the main clause. This is an important rule to be followed. Also, there is some other characteristic that that is found, let's say, in subordination. This characteristic says that you can put the dependent clause at the start or at the end of the sentence. Usually, subordinators are flexible in their position. You can put the subordinator either at the beginning of the sentence, or you can put it at the middle or near the end of the sentence. So they are usually flexible in being used in different positions within the sentence. So you can say, for example, while I was in college, my younger sister was in high school. Here we have started by using the subordinator. Or the same sentence could be put in a different way by saying, my younger sister was in high school while I was in college. So as you can see here, this is an important feature which distinguishes subordinators from coordinators. Coordinators are usually fixed in their position, while subordinators are flexible in being used in different positions. Now we come to the types of subordinate clauses. In fact, there are three types of subordinate clauses. These three types are nominal clauses, just like I just hope that they will understand. Or you have relative clauses, just like the man who is sitting next to Tom is John. Or we can have adverbial clauses, which express different semantic relations. For example, call me as soon as you get home. Here we have an adverbial clause of time. Because I have to talk to you, here we have an adverbial clause of reason. The boy stood on the box so that he could see better. Here we have an adverbial clause of purpose. Even though I am tired, I will do it. Here we have an adverbial clause of concession. And as you see in the example below, I first met her in Paris, where I lived as a small child. Here we have the second type of subordinate clause. We have a relative clause, because you have the word or the noun Paris, which has been described by using the relative clause, where I lived as a small child. So the first clause, I first met her in Paris, this will be the main or the independent clause, while the other clause, where I lived as a small child, this will be the subordinate or the dependent clause. We will start by the first type of subordinate clauses, which are called noun or nominal clauses. A noun clause has a subject and a verb. Of course, if you have a clause, this means that you have a subject and a clause. It is used as the subject or object in a sentence. عادة يستخدم الnominal clause في موقع، أما أن يكون موقع الفاعل أو موقع المفعول به في الجملة. A noun clause is a dependent clause that works like a noun. إذن هو أحد أنواع ال dependent or subordinate clauses، ويعمل عمل الاسم. You can find it as a subject or object. ممكن أن تجدوه في موقع الفاعل أو في موقع المفعول به. For example, if we say, I read what she wrote. What she wrote, this is the nominal clause, which starts with a WH word. So, إذا نجي إلى موقع هذا الnoun clause هنا اللي هو dependent clause or subordinate clause، نجد إنه موقعه راح يكون مفعول به. أما في المثال الآخر, what she wrote is interesting، هنا نفس الnominal clause جاء في موقع الفاعل. So, it can be used generally either as a subject or an object. Also, you can find other examples of noun clauses. Whoever rides in a car should wear a seat belt. Also here, whoever rides in a car, this is the nominal clause, which is a subordinate clause also, and it is used as a subject in this sentence. Cameron said that he is watching television. Here we have a nominal clause starting with the word that, and the position of this noun clause is the direct object. Listening to tapes is how I learned French. Here, how I learned the French, this is the nominal clause which starts with the WH word how. إذا نجي إلى موقع هذا النون clause بالجملة ما دام هو مسبوق ب verb to be is إذا راح يكون موقعه predicate or complement of the sentence. In the final example, please listen to what the doctor says. What the doctor says, this is the nominal or the noun clause which starts with the WH word what, and regarding the position of this noun clause, since it is preceded by the preposition to, then it is used as a prepositional phrase. إذا ما دام كان مسبوق هنا بحرف جر إذا راح يكون موقعه أو وظيفته it is used as a prepositional phrase. إذا هذه هي المواقع التي تشغلها الnoun clauses في الجملة كما ترون حسب موقعها في الجملة. The second type of subordinate clauses is called relative clauses. Subordinate clauses that give more information about the person or thing mentioned in the main clause, and they are introduced by relative pronouns. إذا عادة نستخدم relative clauses إنه نختار relative pronoun المناسب كي نصف اسم جاء قبله، أما يكون اسم لشخص، اسم لشيء، اسم لمكان. إذا نستخدم relative clauses كي نعطي وصفا لذلك الاسم. The relative pronoun always comes after the noun it describes and can function as the subject or the object of the clause. دائما الاسم الموصول أو ضمير الوصل أو the relative pronoun يأتي بعد الاسم الذي نصفه في الجملة، ونختار ضمير الوصل المناسب كأن يكون who أو whom أو which بحسب موقع الاسم في الجملة، موقع الاسم الذي نصفه إن كان فاعل أو مفعول به. So as you can see in the examples, the woman who visited me in the hospital was very kind. هنا الاسم اللي نصفه هو كلمة woman، وصفناه باستخدام relative clause who visited me in the hospital. إذا راح نقول who visited me in the hospital, this is the dependent or the subordinate clause. Which type of subordinate clause? We will say it is a relative clause. In the second example, the umbrella that I bought last week is already broken. Here again we have used the relative pronoun that, or we can use which also, to describe the word umbrella. So the clause that I bought last week is a relative clause, and it is one of the types of subordinate clauses. In the third example, the man who stole my backpack has been arrested. So here we have used who stole my backpack as a relative clause to describe the word man. إذا راح نقول في هذه الحالة the clause who stole my backpack is a dependent clause whose type is a relative clause. In the last example, the weather that we had this summer was beautiful. Here we are describing the word weather by using the relative pronoun that, or we can use which also. So the clause that we had this summer, this is the relative clause which has been used as a subordinate clause to describe the word weather. This is the way in which relative clauses are used as subordinate clauses. Now we come to the third type of subordinate clauses, which are called adverb clauses. An adverb clause is a subordinate clause that modifies a verb, an adjective, or another adverb. إذا نستخدم الادverbial clauses باعتبارها نوع من أنواع subordinate clauses أيضا، وتستخدم لوصف عنصر معين في الجملة، كأن تستخدم لوصف الفعل أو الصفة أو حتى لوصف ظرف آخر يوجد في الجملة. It begins with a subordinating conjunction. طبعا دائما يكون هنالك إحدى أدوات الربط اللي هي نسميها subordinating conjunctions or subordinators. ووظيفة الادverb clause it tells how, when, where, why, or to what extent. وظيفة الادverb clause في الجملة انه تنطيني معلومات عن مثلا الكيفية، عن الزمان، عن المكان، عن السبب، عن الغرض، عن النتيجة، عن علاقة شرطية معينة. هذه هي وظيفة الادverb clauses بالجملة. For example, if Sam calls, please tell him that I will be late. إذا هنا عندي complex sentence لأن استخدمت بها subordinator if. We played in the garden until the sun set. Here, until the sun set, this is the subordinate clause. إذا أسألكم شنو نوع subordinate clause, you will say it is an adverbial clause of time لأنه يشير إلى وجود علاقة زمانية. Though she was busy, Alice helped the young boy. Here again we have an adverbial clause, though she was busy. إذن راح يكون عندي نوع خاص من أنواع adverbial clauses which is called an adverbial clause of concession. John went home after he finished his lunch. After he finished his lunch, this is the subordinate clause. نوع هذا subordinate clause, it is an adverbial clause of time because it gives information about the time. We will start with each type of adverbial clauses. عندنا بالحقيقة عدة أنواع من adverbial clauses باللغة الإنجليزية. أول هذه الأنواع هو adverbial clauses of time أو الجمل الظرفية التي تدل على الوقت. أدوات الربط التي تستخدم في هذا النوع من adverbial clauses تشمل مثلا when, whenever, as soon as, while, after, before, until, since. كل هذه الأدوات تستخدم للتعبير عن وجود علاقة زمنية. So these words or conjunctions link the adverbial clause of time with the main sentence. تعمل أدوات الربط هذه على الربط ما بين الجملة الظرفية التي تدل على الوقت مع الجملة الرئيسية أو الجملة المستقلة. For example, you have these two separate sentences. I found a watch. I was walking in the street. هنا لدينا جملتان مستقلتان. إذا رغبنا أن نربط ما بين هاتين الجملتين فلا بد أن نعرف شنو العلاقة اللي تربط ما بينهم. فممكن أعبر عنها باستخدام علاقة زمنية. I can say I found a watch while I was walking in the street. فwhile هنا is a subordinator which is used in the beginning of an adverbial clause of time. The second type of adverbial clauses are called adverbial clauses of place للإشارة إلى وجود علاقة مكانية. Adverbial clauses of place are introduced by the subordinating conjunctions where and wherever. نستخدم where, wherever كsubordinators إن كانت هنالك علاقة مكانية في الجملة. For example, I have put it where I can find it again. إذن where I can find it again هو هذا subordinate clause اللي راح يكون نوعه adverbial clause of place. They can stay where they are. Again, where they are, this is the adverbial clause of place. Where you live, I will live. هنا بدأنا الجملة باستخدام subordinator. إذن راح يكون عندي الclause where you live. This will be the adverbial clause of place. He led the caravan wherever he wanted to go. Wherever he wanted to go, this is the adverbial clause of place. You can put it wherever you like. أيضا, wherever you like, this will be the adverbial clause of place. The third type is called adverbial clauses of condition للدلالة على وجود معنى شرطي في الجملة. عادة نستخدم if للدلالة على وجود المعنى الشرطي. If we win, we will go to celebrate. If we win, this is the subordinate or dependent clause. We will go to celebrate. This will be the independent clause. She would buy a house if she had enough money. If she had enough money, this is the adverbial clause of condition. If you study, you will get good grades. Again, if you study, this will be the adverb clause of condition. Adverb clauses of condition also can be introduced by using other conjunctions, not only if. You can use whether and you can use unless to express a condition relation. For example, If it rains, we shall stay at home. Here we have used also if. If it rains, this will be the adverbial clause of condition. You must go whether you hear from him or not. Whether you hear from him or not, this will be the adverbial clause of condition. Unless you work harder, you will fail. Also here we have unless you work harder. This is the subordinate clause whose type is an adverbial clause of condition. Unless you tell her about your love, she won't know it. Again, unless you tell her about your love, this will be the adverbial clause of condition. Adverbial clauses of concession. Now, although he is small, he is very strong. Although is one of the subordinators which are used in a special kind of adverbial clauses which are called adverbial clauses of concession. Although he is small, this is the adverbial clause of concession, and he is very strong, this will be the independent clause. نلاحظ دائما when we have a clause of concession لدينا نتيجة مخالفة لما كان متوقع. No matter how smart they are required to do the revision. No matter how smart they are, this will be the adverb clause of concession. The girl was still dead no matter what the doctor did. أيضا, no matter what the doctor did, this will be the adverbial clause of concession. So as you can see here, clauses of concession show a contrast in ideas. تبين عندي أو توضح عندي أن هنالك تناقض في الأفكار. The main or independent clauses show the unexpected outcome. دائما نجد في العبارة الفعلية المستقلة نتيجة مخالفة للتوقعات. This is called an adverb clause of concession. Adverb clauses of cause or reason. إذن العبارات الظرفية الدالة على وجود علاقة سببية. They are introduced by the subordinating conjunctions because, as, or since. For example, because I like you, I shall help you. Then because I like you, this is an adverbial clause of reason. Since you are so clever, you will be able to explain this. Since you are so clever, this is an adverbial clause of reason. As I love you, I can do anything for you. As I love you, this is the adverbial clause of reason because it gives the reason for something. I did it because I wanted to. Because I wanted to, this will be the adverbial clauses of reason. Now we come to the adverb clauses of purpose. The adverb clause of purpose may indicate the purpose which the verb may address. إذن تشير إلى وجود غاية أو غرض معين نتيجة لأداء فعل معين. For example, the subordinating conjunctions which can be used in this type of adverbial clauses, you can use, for example, so that, in order that, in order to, or even you can use lest. Lest, in fact, has a negative meaning. For example, I will give you a map. So what is the purpose behind giving you the map? So that you can find the way to your relative's house. Sleep well, lest you will not write your exam very well. So, someone may ask, what is the purpose behind sleeping well? The purpose is that you will write your exam very well. So, lest you will not write your exam very well, this will be the adverbial clause of purpose. He was invited to the function in order to show him how wonderfully this function has been organized. So, in order to, this is the subordinator which has been used to introduce an adverbial clause of purpose. He drew the sword so that he could defend himself. So that again is a subordinator which is introduced, which is used to introduce an adverbial clause of purpose. Clauses of result. They are usually introduced by the subordinating conjunction that. أما أن نستخدم that لوحدها أو in a few sentences the conjunctions so or such may be added. يعني أما أن نستخدم that لوحدها أو نستخدم so, that or such, that. For example, he is such a good man that all respect him. Here we have used such that. In these sentences, or in this sentence, you could find the result of the first part of the sentence has been presented in the second part of the sentence. So usually the result is found in the second part of the sentence. النتيجة دائما تكون موجودة في الجزء الثاني من الجملة. Here are some other examples of adverbial clauses of result. I was so tired after my swim session that I fell asleep within a few minutes of arriving home. إذا دائما الكلوز اللي يبدي ب that بكلمة that راح يكون هو subordinate clause. راح نقول شنو نوع subordinate clause. It is an adverbial clause of result. عندي ينطيني نتيجة لما حدث في الجزء الأول من الجملة. Number 2. She was such a sweet little cat that I couldn't resist spoiling her. That I couldn't resist spoiling her. This will be the adverbial clause of result. Number 3. It was so old that it fell apart when I dropped it. That it fell apart when I dropped it. Again, this will be the adverbial clause of result. عندي يعطيني النتيجة التي حدثت. He was such a good dancer that I couldn't stop watching him. That I couldn't stop watching him. This will be the adverbial clause of result. It expresses the result of the action expressed in the first part of the sentence. We have adverbial clauses of manner. For example, if you say, please do as I have told you. Or he cries as if he were mad. He speaks as though he were the boss. So here we have 3 subordinators which can be used to introduce an adverb clause of manner. Either you use as, or you use as if, or you use as though. By the way, if you use as if or as though, usually you use the subjunctive mood with the verb. For example, he cries as if he were mad. As though he were the boss. Here we used were and we didn't use was because they express something unreal. When you say as if he were mad, he is not really mad. When you say as though he were the boss, this means that he is not in fact the boss. That's why we have used were instead of was in these 2 examples. So when you use as if or when you use as though, and you have the subject he or she, usually you use were and you don't use was. But if you use as can be used in a normal way. You don't need to put were with he or she. But if you have as if or as though, you use he were or she were instead of he was or she was, because it expresses something unreal. Now, under the clauses of comparison of degree للدلالة على وجود, let's say, نوع من المقارنة. Other clauses of comparison of degree are introduced by the subordinating conjunction than. إذن نشوف إنه تحتوي على subordinator than أو the relative adverb اللي هو as للدلالة على المقارنة. Examples: he is older than he looks. إذن than he looks, this will be the adverb clause of comparison. It is later than I thought. Again, than I thought, this will be the adverbial clause of comparison. He is as stupid as he is lazy. Again, here we have an adverbial clause of comparison. He is not so clever as you think. إذا هنا استخدمنا so as أيضا للدلالة على وجود نوع من أنواع المقارنة. So again, so clever as you think, this will be the adverb clause of comparison. Here I have tried to select some different examples of the adverbial clauses to show you how they can be used within sentences. Number one, I did this work because this work is part of my educational project. Here we have the subordinator because, then we have an adverbial clause of reason. Number two, he ate as if he were starving for months. We have the subordinator as if, then we have an adverbial clause of manner, and we have used as if as the subordinator. تلاحظون بعدها عندنا الفاعل he، لكن استخدمنا وياه الفعل were. لماذا؟ لأنه لا يدل على شيء حقيقي. Number three, before you go, bring me some water. Before you go, here we have an adverbial clause of time. Put it where we can see it. Where we can see it, this is an adverbial clause of place. Even though we treat her kindly, she is suspicious of us. Here, even though we treat her kindly, this is an adverbial clause of concession because something unexpected happened in the second clause. Unless you study hard, you will fail in this exam. Here we have unless, which is one of the subordinators which are used to introduce conditional sentences. So, unless you study hard, this is an adverbial clause of condition. In the final example, we need to eat so that we may live. So that is one of the subordinators which are used to introduce an adverbial clause of purpose. So that we may live, this will be the subordinate clause. The type of this subordinate clause, we will say it is an adverbial clause of purpose. This is the end of our lesson for today, in which we have discussed subordination in English. We have learned what does the word or the term subordination mean, what do we mean by a subordinate clause, what do we mean by subordinating conjunctions, and then we have discussed in detail the three types of subordinate clauses in English, and we gave examples for each of these three types. I hope you find the lecture interesting and useful as well, and I would like to thank you for your attention and for attending this lecture. Hope to see you soon, inshallah, in our next lectures. So, if you have any questions, I'm always ready to answer all your questions. Thank you again and have a nice day.